and MDX training sessions. So in last session we discussed a few options in in SSAS dimensions tab or SSAS dimensions page. So what we discussed was like creating hierarchies and what are the different panes that we have in the dimension structure tab. And we also discussed about attribute relationships and its benefits or advantages. And we discussed about translations, and we discussed about the use of the option browser. In last session, I mentioned that we will be discussing about the properties of the dimensions and the attributes in today's session. I'll try to cover the properties that you can understand with the knowledge that you have on analysis services at this point of time. You are yet to see the cubes, you are yet to see the partitions and calculations, few options in the cubes, and many things are yet to come, right? So if I try to explain all the properties here, you'll get confused. I'll try to pick the properties that you can understand without any trouble or any issue. So let me open SQL Server Management Studio. We deployed the cube project, the project that whatever we have done, SSAS training, to our analysis services, analysis server yesterday. Let me open that. And let me highlight the properties window too. A lot of properties. Okay, let me connect to the analysis services. It's going to not respond anymore. Every 5 minutes. Something is wrong with my system. I have to reboot. I have to either reboot or reformat. So if you see, this is the database we deployed yesterday. What the hell? It's so slow. And if you see the dimensions and the cubes, there are no cubes because we have not deployed any cubes, and there is only one dimension. If you have cubes, you can right click on the cube and you can browse the cube. And similarly, if you see the dimension, you can browse it here, just like how you browsed in your Visual Studio or SQL Server data tools. And you see the same page, what you have seen here. This browser and this browser are same. The way that you can see what data is coming into your dimensions. This is the hierarchy we built, and you can see the data is hierarchical in nature. And the postal code, there are customers. There are two customers from the same postal code. Even here. Now, let's jump into the properties of analysis services. There is a reason for showing this particular browser option. Before knowing more about that in SQL Server Management Studio, let's quickly see some properties, the dimension level properties. If you see, when I right click here, there's a set of properties showing on the properties pane. And when I right click on the attribute, there are different set of properties. Similarly, you will find different set of properties on the hierarchies and the level of the hierarchies. And empty is it by default, it takes the dimension properties. You see the customer dimension is the property. Or you can pick from here. When you are on the attributes, you can pick it from here, what attribute property you want to see. All the attributes will be listed, and you can see the properties of each attribute. Now, the first one on dimensions properties. We will be discussing almost by the end of the session, we'll be discussing end of the total training sessions, we'll be discussing about 90% of the properties. 10% are not relevant or not important. Not relevant in the sense maybe related to the data mining or some concept that we will not be covering as part of this training sessions. The first property, attribute all member name. If you see any attribute, if you take, it will be rolled up into the all member. Like for example, if you see in the browser, let me pick one attribute, category. When I select category, which is nothing but a category column in my customer dimension. So what values I have in the category column? If you go here, let me quickly connect to SQL. Okay, and let me run a query. in wide world importers, select star from dimension dot customer, and the attribute that I'm looking at is category, right? And if I say distinct, this is how it reads the data. It reads the data, the distinct attribute, the distinct column values, and it sorts it and it it stores the data. Now, if you see order by category, so whatever the data that you're gonna get for this query, NA and novelty shop, you'll be seeing the same data here in the same order, because the order by will be based on the data type. This data type is string, and it will be ordered by the string value. Now, from where this all is coming? All is the aggregated level of this category column. That means these two values total. Let's say NA has $100 sales and the novelty shop has $200 sales. The all of this particular attribute will give you the total of this, the roll up of these two, or the roll up of all the members of the dimension attribute. So that will be the answer for the all will be $300. Now, if you drag this attribute next to a measure, like for example, sale, in the same exact, I mean, like $100 for NA and $200 for novelty shop, the output will be it will be $300 next to all. Under that there will be NA, which is $100. Under that there will be novelty shop, which will be $200. That's how the all is the aggregated member, or aggregated level. Okay, so by saying that, if you see the name of the attribute, it says that attribute all member name, and at the bottom of the properties pane, it gives some information about the property that you are highlighting. Specifies the name of the all member. So instead of showing all, you want to show some specific name for that. For example, instead of all members, total. So total makes, somebody likes to see it as total instead of all. So in that case, if I set it to total, and if I quickly reprocess it, and remember this is at the dimension level property. If you modify any dimension level property, then it will have impact on all the attributes that are available, on all the hierarchies in the particular dimension. Now let me go to the browser. Let me reconnect it, and you can see the all has been changed to total. So instead of giving routine all, the roll-up name, you can give whatever you are comfortable with. And if you select any attribute of this dimension, it will be total. You cannot give one name or one all member name for each attribute, different name for each attribute. It will be same name for all the attributes of the dimension. So in this case, this is the dimension customer, and all the attributes. If you try to see what data you have, the aggregated level is called as the current level, or the aggregated level, which is nothing but all level, but I asked the server to show it as total. That is the first property, very rarely used, but there are few people who uses this, the people who are very good in analysis services. And the second one we'll skip we'll skip. We'll come back to this. There are some set of properties which I mean, you need to understand the cubes well before coming to this. And processing group. So this is the default value for the processing group is a processing group. If you see, this specifies the processing group setting for the dimension. What this particular property talks about is how you want to process the particular dimension. So dimension has 10 columns. So these 10 columns, how you want to process it, by table or by attribute. If you select by table, all the table data will be read into your memory, and then it processes the data. It will be faster in few cases, but it will be damn slower in few cases. The reason is it reads all the data into memory, but by table option is very poor in doing pre-checks. Pre-checks means does the system has enough memory or not. Like for example, if your dimension table has 50 million records and it requires 100 GB of data, 100 GB of memory, then it won't do that pre-check. If your system has 10 GB of RAM, then it will try to read all the data and place it over there, and it will get messed up, and it will be, see, the performance will be even slower compared to the by attribute. By attribute is far better in many cases. By attribute, uses the resources very well. Analysis services resources, it uses very little memory. The comparison that I had when, I mean, a couple of years back was like, for huge dimensions, like the dimensions tables which has millions of records, during processing, if you select by table, if it takes 20 gigs of memory, the by attribute will take only like 6 to 7 gig of memory. So by attribute option uses the system and resources as well as analysis services resources very wisely. And also keep in mind, Microsoft has given default values for each property. Those are the best options to make full use of the system resources and to process the data pretty faster. I mean, in a reasonably faster way. Now, by table, it reads all the data. That's what I heard or I read when I was new to analysis services. And by attribute, I've shown you how by attribute works. Each attribute query will be sent to the source system and retrieves the data, distinct data, and stores the data. Now let's quickly see by selecting the by table how it's going to work. I've never tried this before. I'm trying it with you guys. So I selected the option processing group by table, and let me deploy it. We all know that if it is by attribute, it sends different query for each attribute and it gets the data. Now what query it is sending here? If you see here, this read 4 records, but there is no query. This read 4 records, no query. Sorry, 3 records, no query. So the query is sent in one single time. I mean, as one single query instead of each query for attribute. So now if you see the query, if you execute it in your SQL, it gives you all the columns that are used in your dimension, that are used in your dimension as attributes, right? And that's the difference between by table and by query, by attribute. And if you select by attribute, we have already seen that, but let me quickly show you that once again. It will send distinct query for distinct attributes, and let's quickly check that once. Here it is, and there will be no separate query, only one single, I mean, not a one table level query, but at attribute level. You see, oops, here is the query. This is only for getting the customer information. Similarly, this is for getting customer key information. So that's the difference. But picking what is best to your system, what is best to your project. If you have a dimension with less data, like let's say 100,000 records or anything less than that, it's good to go with by table. But remember, all the table will be read into your memory and then it will process. And if you don't have enough memory, then it's better to go by attribute option. By attribute is always resource. It makes well use of the resources. And if you have super good memory like in terabytes, you can go with by table for all the dimensions. Even then, if you have 100 dimensions, then you land into trouble. So think wisely, and if the table is pretty small, go with the by table option. Now let's jump into the next one. Processing mode. Okay, let's see the processing mode. This is too early to discuss. We will come back to this. And processing priority. We will discuss this when we discuss about processing mode. Unknown member. So the unknown member says that now the options are specifies the existence of an unknown member and whether that member is visible or hidden. Now, if there is any null value, if a null is expected, then if you want to convert it into unknown, you can use this option. For example, if you have a fact data like 100 records and all the 100 sales were made by a customer called Rupesh, and if there is no Rupesh in your dimension here, you can change some of the error configurations here to ignore the error or to convert to the unknown. For example, if you see, let me set this unknown member. Do you want to show or don't show or visible or automatic null? So let me set it to visible. which means if there is any unknown member, show it to the users, or show it when you query it. Now, if you see the options, key error action, you can, not that, key not found. What is that? Okay. Key error action you can convert to unknown, and there should be one more property where you can convert to unknown. One second. This is the problem in finding out which I can discuss now, and see here. So null, when there is a null processing option, if you set it to unknown, and when you use the properties of a dimension level unknown, then it works, or else it won't work. I'll explain you what this property is, but when we discuss about the cubes, we will definitely revisit this. We have a lot to revisit, lot of properties to revisit here. The property is, let's say if you don't find any key, or if there is any null value in the key, if the key is null acceptable, nullable column, in that case, you can set this visible member, unknown member to visible, and you can give some name, let's say not specified. So what the server will do is, instead of showing as null, or instead of throwing an error, it will show not specified or not available, or whatever the text that you give here. Generally, we maintain it, or we tackle it in our data warehousing concepts. When we load the data into our data warehouse model, if a particular key is not found in the dimension table, what we will do is, we will just replace it with unknown, or not specified, or not applicable, or not provided. Some kind of text we will give. But here, if you don't don't implement that in your data warehousing design, then you can use this option to convert all the missing keys into not specified, or unknown, or any standard text that you are interested to give. So that's the option unknown member. But to understand it better, and for me to explain it better, we have to look into the cubes, and we can revisit this particular property again. And the remaining properties, if you see, name is nothing but the name, whatever the name of the dimension, and type of the dimension, it's a regular type, which means it's a regular textual any other dimension. There are few types defined by analysis services. If you see few templates, if you see, one is time template, which means the dimension table is built on the time dimension table. Sorry, the dimension is built on the time dimension table. Similarly, geography, which talks about the locations, organizations, bill of materials, there are predefined templates. That doesn't mean that the dimensions that you create should fall in any one of these categories. That means these are the options you can make use of. This is the business intelligence the analysis services is providing you to make use of. Okay, if your dimension doesn't fall into any of these, then you can mark it as, or the server by default marks it as regular dimension. Regular dimension is nothing but a plain dimension, and if you create a time dimension, you can mark it as time dimension, and we will be doing that now, in some time. So time dimension is very key for any analysis service project, because all the analysis will be done over a period of time, right? And MDX missing member, you need to know cube. Proactive caching, you need to know. And storage mode, you need to know the cubes well. So there are only 2 to 3 properties that we discussed, but when we create our first cube, we can revisit and we can see almost all the properties. Like every property we will see with an example, like how we have seen now. For showing this example, we don't need to have the cube, so it's easy. But for showing other examples, you need to have either good knowledge on the cubes, or you need to have the cube available, so that I can show by browsing it, or by after processing by browsing it, and so on. Now let's quickly see a few properties in the dimensions level. In the attribute level. Attribute will have more properties compared to the dimension properties. The first and foremost property is attribute hierarchy display folder. So this property is well used to bucket or to group set of attributes into one folder. Now, if you see the browsing option here, where is our browse? This is our browsing option. Now, even for this, we need to have cube. Now, if you see, all the dimensions and all the hierarchies will be showing as a tree on the left, okay, just like how you are seeing it. If you use the first property, attribute hierarchy display folder, and if you provide any name, then all the, if you provide same name for three attributes, those three attributes will fall into one folder. For example, this relates to customer, and if I give the customer for this, the second one, buying group, and if I give category, again the customer, and customer. So what will happen is, when you try to use this dimension, it will categorize, or it will group these four dimension attributes into one folder, and the folder name is customer. It is saying that what a display folder you want to create to display these attributes. If you leave it blank, it will show under customer dimension. If you give some name, then it will show under that particular folder name. Now, under customer, a customer folder will be created, and in that folder you see these four, because we have given attribute hierarchy display folder name to customer for the first four. That is the first property. And even for this, you need to have a cube to show. Let me real quick create a cube, and I will delete it before we start discussing about the cube. I'm going to make it real fast so that you can see it at least. Let me take sales. Let me take profit tax amount maybe, and let me add profit too. And let me add the dimension. You don't concentrate. You don't need to worry about this. We will discuss everything in detail. And regular. Let me go to customer key. Let me go to customer key, and let me process the cube. I just want to show you the folder property, how that looks after processing. Okay, this is completed. Now it should process the dimension and then cube. Okay, process successfully. Now let me go back here. Let me refresh the cube. Now you should see the cube because I created a cube. Now I can browse on the cube. When I click on browse, this browse is the most frequently used one. You will be using this a lot when you start working on analysis services. Now, under folder measures, there is a folder called sales data. Under that, there are two measures that I have created now, right? But under customers, if you see, there is a customer folder created, and at that customer folder, you have these four attributes that we grouped into. Similarly, that is the option attribute hierarchy grouped, or attribute hierarchy display folder. If I give a different one for primary contacts, let's say I'll give it as contacts. Contact or contact info, then this particular attribute will be pushed into contact info folder on postal code. This can be under contact info, right? And what else can be under contact info? Let's say those two are under contact info. Now, if I process it, I just change the folder name, and I'm doing process update. And if I go and browse the cube here, or I can reconnect it because I am already browsing it. You see contact info, there are two attributes grouped into the contact. So all similar attributes you can group into one folder. The spelling is wrong, but just leave it that, or else I can correct it. So let me correct that. Okay, the next property is attribute hierarchy enable, and you will see another property which is similar to this, attribute hierarchy visible. See the second one and the fifth one. So if you see the second one, it says it indicates whether the attribute hierarchy is enabled for this attribute or not. Okay, hierarchy. And if you use if you see the attribute hierarchy visible, it says that indicates whether the attribute hierarchy is visible to the client applications or not. That means if I set this to if I set the properties of, for example, I don't need to show this customer key. See, this is my key column, and users can't understand what based on keys, few users. So what I can do is I can set this as attribute hierarchy property, attribute hierarchy visible property to false, and I'm disabling, or I'm setting attribute hierarchy enabled to false to WWI customer ID. Now let's process this dimension and let's see what changes you see in the cube browse. Let me process the cube because I changed the structure or the properties of the dimension attributes. So here I disabled one attribute and I marked the visibility of an attribute to false. Now let's see. So this is processed and let me reconnect it and let me go here. You won't see both the both the attributes. One is disabled, one is attribute hierarchy visible set to false, right? Can you see that? Both of them are not visible here. Then what is the difference here? Let me quickly show you something. Where is that? I'm looking for the dimension. So this is one attribute and this is which we set to false for the enable. Another one is customer key. Now, when you set an attribute hierarchy visible to false, it processes the data. Okay, it processes the data, but it won't show it to the client tab. But on the other side, it completely disables it. You see, there is a slight difference in the icon. This is a dark dotted, dark dots, whereas this is a dark squares kind of thing. Squares kind of thing. That means this attribute is disabled. This is not enabled. Now, when the attribute is visibility set to false, the attribute is processed and you can query it, but it won't be visible to the user. For example, querying means we have to write MDX queries. Let me quickly write an MDX query. You don't need to understand, but I will explain you what I'm writing, and this is just for showing an example. Don't try to understand MDX right now itself. And any one of you remember the attribute that I disabled? So if I execute a query with the customer key, it is giving you all the customer's information. So it is processed, but it's not disabled. But enable, what will happen if I try with enable? It will be the same, right? It will be the same or different? It's different. The reason is enable means it will not process at all. Whereas the disable, or visibility to false means it processes. It stores the data. It stores the data on the analysis services files, but it won't be visible. If you don't want an attribute to be processed, you can just disable it. It occupies some space. It takes some time. Why you have to go through all those things? Instead, you better disable it or remove it. There is a reason for disabling it, which we will discuss soon. All the other attributes which you want to be processed as part of your cube design, but you don't want to show it to the end users, then you can set the attribute hierarchy visible property to false. Let's see the next properties which we can discuss here. Attribute hierarchy is optimized. We will discuss when we discuss about the aggregations and all. Even this default member, you need to know about the cubes and the calculated members for this to set it, and derive from column ID, derive from table ID, that count, and this gives you, okay. So discretization bucket count and discretization method, these are the two properties which I have never used in last 12 years. But let's discuss a little bit about it. Here, if you see the property, specifies the number of buckets in which the discretized group should members of the attributes. For example, let's take a big attribute, okay, which has more attribute members. I don't want to go with small one. Maybe pin code is the best. Postal code is the better one. Okay, here is the postal code. Postal code has some distinct values. Now, If I want to create, if I specify it to create, let's say 10, the 10 as the number for the bucket count, and if I mark it as automatic, which means the server will decide equal areas, which means equal number of values will be bucketed. And the third thing is clusters. It will use the clusters method to get the distinct values. Okay, now let's see one example first to understand what this method is and what the bucket count is. I'm setting it to automatic, and I'm processing the dimension. No. Oh, it has related attributes. Let me take out this for now. I hope this works, or I may have to delete the whole hierarchy. Let's see if we can create it. This is shit. Or else I would have picked some other. Cannot have related attributes. What related attributes it has? Okay. This will happen if you use some properties which you have never used before. So let me process it. And let me go to the cube real quick. And cube is unprocessed, so let me process. The cube real. So if you make any changes to your dimension structure, remember your cube will get you have to process full the dimension, and your cube will go away. You have to process the whole cube again. So you have to be very careful while making the changes to the dimensions. Remember that. So let's see postal code. And if you see here, there were so many postal codes. I mentioned the server, okay, group them into 10 different buckets. That's what the property that I've given, right? Just to show you that I deleted the hierarchy. So if you see here, where is the properties? Maybe here. I mentioned it to create 10 different buckets of the data that we have and make it automatic. Pick on your own, like take 10. Now what the server has done is it has created 10 buckets, and starting to here it has created one bucket. Because I specified automatic, it decided how many can go into here. And if you see, it's almost the same amount into each bucket, the profit amount. So it created for you. And 9,000, 90,005 to 90,080, one bucket was created. Like that, it creates the bucket. Similarly, if you select 25, okay, then it will create 25 for you. This is the option discretization bucket count. There was no real case scenario where I had to use this. That's why I've never used this. But if you want to use it, you can use it. It gives you some aggregated data. Instead of taking creating the groups after processing the data, you can use this property. So let me reconnect. Again, the cube is gone. So let me process it real quick. Now you should see 25 different buckets. This Visual Studio, SSMS is gone. We have to wait when Microsoft says not responding. Nice, it stopped working. Good, it restarted. Let me connect to the analysis services again. I installed Visual Studio 2015 and this SQL Server 2016. Then from that day, my system is gone. My system does not have enough RAM and all, it seems. So let me open the cube. Let me process it because it is erased. because of the changes that I have made to the dimension. And let me close. Now let me browse it. Let me get the sales data or profit or tax amount, and let me get the postal code. Execute the query, and you see it has created 25 very close buckets or whatever it decides on its own. If we cluster is kind of an algorithm. If you take cluster, I mean, I've never used this. It uses some formula, clusters formula, to create these 25 buckets. Similarly, equal areas means it will take, let's say it has 25, it will create 111. If it has 50, it will create 222 into one bucket. If it has 1000, it will create 25, I mean 40, 40, 40 into each bucket. So this is about the bucket count and the discretization method. And estimated count is just a number, specifies the number of members in the attribute. You give some estimated number. It's just a hint to the analysis services. Okay, how many members can come, or what is the estimated count of members in this particular attribute? If you think, or if you know the number should be somewhere around 100,000 records, you can specify that 100,000. Then it's just a hint to the analysis services. And what else we can discuss? There is a property which is aggregatable. If you select this aggregatable, it's a true or false. If you set it to false, by default it is true. Let's see what happens if you set it to false. Okay, I set this to false. Let me directly process the cube, because anyhow the cube will be erased after processing the dimension due to the changes that I've made to the cube and dimension structure. Now we made the property, we changed the property is aggregatable for one of the attribute. Now let's see. If I reconnect here, if I go to the first primary contact, under members, you see total. Under that, you have all the members, right? The aggregated level is total. And let's go to the postal code. If you see members, it's directly members under it. There is no all member or no total. So if you set the is aggregatable to false, then there will be no all member. It won't be aggregated to all. It won't be rolled up to all. The all level will not be created. So this is a big one here. So that's why you can't see. If you take a small one, I mean, which has very little number of members, let's say for example category, under members you see total, under that you see all the members, right? But in the other case, and also you see the not specified unknown member. If there is any nulls, it will be converting to the unknowns. So forget about it. We'll discuss about it again. If you go to the postal code, you don't see the total under it, because I said the property is aggregatable. There will be requirement in few places where you don't want, I mean, users don't want to aggregate the data on a particular attribute. In that case, we will set this member to false, is aggregatable property to false. Now let's go to the next property. What we can see, we are on attributes, right? Yep. Equal areas is aggregatable. We just selected. I don't want to leave it false. I'm changing it back to true. Now the next one, order by key, order by attribute. We will come back to this because for that you need to know the key column and the name column properties in the same window. What else you can go now? Format string is not required. Postal code, the name and all is pretty straightforward, and the type of the attribute. Okay, we will discuss this later. Okay, this is an important property. Attribute hierarchy order. This will be set to true for every attribute by default. Now, if you set it to false, you can find out what is the difference. Okay. Now, I set this to false. And I'm processing the dimension. Run. And I'm going to cube browse. Oh, I set on the wrong one, it seems. This is into buckets, right? So I just want to create this, I mean, the property on something else. Let me select customer. And let me set the property um, attribute hierarchy order to false, and let me process it. Because I created buckets for the other one, right? So you cannot get that in a better way. You cannot understand the example. That's why I'm setting the same property to false in a different attribute. So now this is processed. Let me go here real quick and let me get the sales profit, customer. So actually what happens here is when you set this property to false or true, generally it takes the data that is coming from your source and it won't order, or it order while storing the data, while retrieving the data, it orders or it won't order. I don't have a good example here to show this because all the data is very limited. It's only T and a W are there. So attribute hierarchy order generally says that indicates whether the member of the attribute hierarchies are to be ordered. If that source system has 2 values or 10 values in the descending order, if you set this to false, the values will come in the descending order in your report. If you set this to true, automatically while processing, it also orders the data. So the best example is I can show you in Excel here. I mean to explain it because I don't have a proper attribute here to show that. Let me take this. So let's say you have a customer and you have a Vinay, patient Anil. If you set the attribute hierarchy order property to true, when you browse this, when you drag this customer into your queue while browsing it, the data will be like this. Because it will be ordered. You ask the server to order the attribute. If you specify it to false, the data will be like this. Whatever the order that comes from the source when you try to read, it will be in the same order. It won't sort the data that is coming in. That is the property. Unfortunately, we have very less data for the primary contact. We can try this primary contact. What kind of data we have here? Let me see the data, if this data is good enough to show an example. Let me connect to database, new query. Oops. So this has A, and how the data is in this table. Select star from dimension dot customer. The one which we are looking at is primary contact. It is in different order. Let's see by not ordering or by not sorting it, whether it comes in the same order or a different order. So for customer primary contact, we'll go and change the property to false. And let me process this. Let me process clear. Just to clear all the data that has been already read. And I'll do process full on it. And once it is processed, now let me go to the browser here in the dimension and let me reconnect it and let me drag the primary contact. And if you see, I don't know why it is coming in order. My bad, guys. My bad. Actually, order by is the property which I was talking about, and this is just a hint to the analysis services. That's why I mean it's my bad, my mistake. So order by is the one which orders the data, and this looks like just an hint, indicates whether the members of the attribute hierarchies are ordered or not. So that's why it is not working as expected. So this is my bad. So when we discuss about this order by, then we can see that, okay? We can see how the data will be ordered by key or name when we discuss about the key columns and the name columns. But still, I can't believe that. My apologies for that, for misleading. Okay, it looks like just a hint. It's not having any impact. It's giving a hint to the server that the members in the attribute hierarchy are ordered or not, true and false. Whether the members of the attribute hierarchy are ordered. I don't see any meaning of this, but I'll get back to you on that with more information. And let's go to the next attribute, properties. The key thing which we need to discuss before discussing the order by and all is the key column, name column, and value column. So if you don't understand this key column, name column, and value column properties here, then you cannot understand MDX at all. MDX talks about the key column, name column, and value column. Among these three properties, 90% of the MDX queries revolve around this key column and the name column, and value column is an extra property which you can make use to carry some calls, carry some data. So now let's see what is this key column and what is this name column in this session, and we can take the value column to the next session. So the key column is nothing but if you see how these attribute values are uniquely identified. So that is by the key column. So if you take this attribute, one of the attribute is custom primary contact, right? So how each attribute is uniquely identified, attribute member is uniquely identified, that is your key column, which means if you have 403 records here. All the 403 records should be uniquely identified. Let's say there are, what's his name? Akarsha Nokala. So let's say this Akarsha Nokala. There are two Akarsha Nokalas. How you uniquely identify that? So that is the key column of it. So for most of the attributes, whatever you drag and drop, the key column is nothing but the column that you selected, which means it takes all the distinct values. This is the key column. So this is how you can uniquely identify an attribute member. And if you don't specify the name column, then the key column will be the name column. Now, why we need two? We can live with only key column. Why the name column? So let's see that why we need name column here. So if you worked on any drill throughs, drill downs, like for example, while filling the applications or while logging into Facebook, or while registering with Facebook or any such kind of websites, you'd have seen an option called a drill down, or what we call checkbox, or so select gender is the field. So there will be an option. When you select this, you will see two options. One is male, another one is female, right? So when you have these two options, when you select male, for example, it won't send male back to the system. In the system, it will save either 1 or 2. If they define male as 1 and female as 2, this 1 will be sent and it will be stored in the database system while registering to any website or any portal, job portal, or whatever it is. So here in this case, the use of 1 and 2 is to make easy for the querying and updating and saving the data. And this male and female is easy to see the data, like to the user. If I give 1 or 2, what will you select? You don't know what is 1 and what is 2. The 1 means male. If I give you male, you can easily select male. If I give you 1, you cannot select 1 and 2. So that is why the key columns is the main purpose of the key columns is for the data storage, updates and all will be easy, and maintenance will be easy if it is the key values. And the male and female will be for customer. So there will be a table in the database called master table or the dimension table 1, 2, which is male, and this is female. These two columns will be read into the website, and it will show male and female. This particular column will be shown to the users, and this particular column will be used on selection of either male or female. If they select female, they will take 2 and store it into the system of your record. If you select male, they'll take 1 and store it into the system of record when you register with any site. So what you see is one thing, what hiding behind that to provide uniqueness is one thing. Why we need these key columns? The reason is, let's say you have to select city from the what you call, I don't know what we call this box. So when you have to select city, and there are two cities with the same name, Hyderabad and Hyderabad, which city belongs to you? One will be in Pakistan. Let's say this is Pakistan, and let's say this is India. If you select this, but if your intention is to select the other one, then you will end up in a different geographical location. Your profile will be marked as Hyderabad in so and so, right? So in these kind of scenarios, the solution is to maintain states on top of it, on countries on top of it, right? Multi-selection drop box, we call it as. Thanks, Praveen. So when you have to select this kind of data, they maintain a key column to maintain to make the maintenance of the data easy in the UI system. Similarly, in the key column, if you say key column here, whatever is the key column is something that is hiding behind to provide uniqueness to each member of it, each member of this particular attribute. This is hiding behind to provide uniqueness. Name column is whatever it's showing to the user. Whatever user sees is name column. But here there is nothing, it's none. None for the name column, which means user will not see anything. No, that's wrong. User will see whatever is there in the key column if the name column is blank. So if we don't specify any name column, that means users will see the same that is available in the key column. This, whatever you see on my screen, is same as what is the primary contact, right? So instead of selecting it, you can leave it blank. If you leave it blank, the key column will be your name column too. So that is the reason. So now, how can you identify what is the key column and the name column? And let me show you an example here. So you know the customer key which we disable or which we set the visibility to false. Let me enable it. And the key column for this one is, of course, the customer key, which means it shows the customer key, right? If I process this and if I try to browse the cube after successful process of this, let me quickly show you that. Okay. And if I go to the browser, if I reconnect it and if I go to the customer key, this should be enabled now. You see on the total it has 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't understand what this is because the key column is selected. I have selected customer key as key column. So in that case, okay, use key column or customer key as the column to provide uniqueness for this attribute. But when users drag that, I want to show customer name instead of the customer key. So I selected a different name column than the key column. Now let me quickly process and let me reconnect and see what it's gonna show to the user. Here, let me go to the browser and let me reconnect it. And you see the customer key is showing the names now to the user because I selected the name column as the customer as the name column. Now, if this is the case, where this key column will be used or how it will be used, it will be used a lot in your MDX queries. Let me quickly process this cube. Okay. And let me show you a quick example where this key column will be used and how to use the key column. You don't need to know the complete MDX for this, just a brief. So if I go to the customer and if I select the sales, for example, I want to see profit on 0, and let me go to the customer and I can select the names here. So for example, I'm selecting toys, something, tailspin toys and so on. When I drag and drop it, it is taking the key. You see, you observe that? So the name is what you are seeing, but what it prefers to take is always the key. If I execute it, it gives me the data for that particular guy. And if I double click here, it shows me what is the key of it, what is the unique name of it, and what is the name field of name field is already shown there. Sorry, caption of it. Caption is what you see, that is what we selected, customer, right? And name and unique name is nothing but the key value of it. So the key is customer key. Now, either you can use key value in the in the MDX queries, or you can use the same name. How can you use the name? Let's say, for example, I want to use the name tailspin something. I can't write there, so let me copy it. So tailspin toys, the key is 1. So ampersand 1 says key. Now if I give the name, what will happen? It will not return anything because there will be no such key available. But to use the name column in your MDX queries, what you need to do is just remove the ampersand before that. If there is no ampersand, that means you are using the name column member to filter the data. If you use ampersand, that means you are trying to use the key column. This is the key column, and if I give 1, it gives me the first record, whatever it is. If I give 10, if there is a key called 10, then it will return the data. So this is about the key column and the name column. We will discuss about the value column in next session. So go through the video before coming to the next session, and we will be discussing a lot about the properties again in the next session. Thanks for joining, guys. See you tomorrow.